That's probably enough time for anybody's clock to be off, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to our second cybersecurity survival guide. The first one happened around Halloween, and this one here we're going to do and talk about a variety of cybersecurity topics. The Future of Cybersecurity is Survival Guide, because it's kind of a thing moving forward along. And of course, that's exciting. I'm joined today by Eric Lewellen. He's new to his career, and we should turn our cameras on. We said we were going to do that this time.
It says I can't, strangely enough.
You're kidding me. Oh my goodness, let's fix that right now. Make a co-host. Try that.
Let's see. Yep, there we go.
Are. Yay! I'm joined today by Eric Lewellen. He's new in his career and very sharp as a senior system administrator, and moonlights with mathematics, which I think is his main job. You'll see a little bit of that here.
Oh yeah, discrete math is pretty fun. And of course, I'm joined by Eric Ellis. He works for CloudLinux as a technical account manager, and he's been managing Linux systems and recommending it to people for the past few decades. And he knows a lot about security and definitely a lot about Linux and server security. So without any further ado, I'll just go ahead and hop straight into it. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here.
We got an agenda here. So a few things we're going to talk about, which will be why you're sharing your screen here, which is really going to be fun, is why bother picking a strong password. We'll talk about some ways of protecting yourself from ransomware. If multi-factor authentication is really worth all the hassle. Backing up, encrypting your system, and then some machine learning stuff at the end, because it's all the rage these days.
Oh yeah. So, and then also when you do that multi-factor and encryption, to save those keys as well.
Yes, yeah. If you don't, you'll regret it. Barely. Well, why bother making a big strong password? You want to show them why, Eric?
Oh yeah, let's find out. So share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yep, looks good.
All right, cool deal. So basic steps on figuring out how a password works. Let's just look at something like a 4-digit PIN. We have like 1407. So the basics on how password complexity works is that we have our complexity. So this is the amount of characters we can have. This is like lowercase letters, uppercase letters, numbers. So 1 through 9, actually 0 through 9, and then all the symbols. For simplicity, I'm just going to do 10 symbols. There are a few more oddball symbols, but that's what most people use when they're typing in a password. And then we also have length. So this is the amount of characters that you have in a particular password. So right here, the length would be 4, and the complexity would just be 10, because it's only 0 through 9. So that will equal your potential passwords here. So right here, using the actual equation we have 10 to the 4th. So that would make this 10,000 passwords. So you could brute force a PIN, a 4-digit PIN, fairly quickly. It wouldn't really be that hard. And moving down, we can also start plugging in numbers and figuring out how changing these values makes a difference in the strength of our password. So let's say we use uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and also symbols. That would be 76 possible options we have every time. And then if we keep to 4, so this is a PIN that could look like 1 hash AD or something like that, we would have actually 33 million potential possibilities for this password. So we can see that the difficulty already jumped up a bunch with just changing the complexity. And the best part about complexity is that you can make a password that's more stronger, but you don't have to increase the amount of characters that are within it. So for any strong password for a vault or anything like that, I would definitely recommend it having the whole 9 yards as far as uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols, just to make things harder right off the bat. But if we really want to get crazy with it, we can show that same standard set at 10 characters, which will be 6 quintillion possibilities. And that's 2 illions over trillion. So, trillions cubed essentially, and bit more than that. But if we go even farther here to 76 to the 16th, we get 1.2 nonillion possibilities. And that's 6 illions above trillion. And so, you would go to trillion, tens of trillions, and then hundreds of trillions, and then you get to quadrillion, and then above that you get to quintillion, and it just keeps going down. And if you go to 32, so this would be like a crazy long password, right? Using symbols, letters, numbers, you would go all the way to 1.5, something called, I doubt many people have heard of this, novum decillion possibilities, right? And this is 16 illions above trillion. So this is something to where even trying to think about this number is extremely difficult. And that's why for something like a vault password or any password for your bank or anything related to your work should be more around these values to really keep yourself looking safe. And a huge reason why I'm going to such insane extremes is not for account access. So a lot of thought that occurs when people first think of, why do I even need this strong of a password? Isn't going to get locked out after 10 tries? Isn't for SSH, isn't there going to be a timeout? For my, say, Netflix account, isn't going to be a lockout after a certain amount of tries? That's true. But in the case of an organization getting hacked, such as LastPass, all those vaults got leaked. Even if you're using MFA, the MFA does not exist within the vault itself. The MFA only exists to limit access to the vault. If the vault is actually compromised and downloaded from the server where it's being held, that means that an attacker essentially has unlimited tries. He can hit it as many times as he wants to, and he doesn't need to worry about getting locked out or anything. And that means that he can use an array of GPUs or something like that, or even like a supercomputer to do, the official term is hash rate. So
right,
I know
you're mining against it.
Do what?
You're mining every possible answer to brute force it, to try and get out.
Yeah, exactly. You're essentially, instead of mining for like the next block in a blockchain, like for cryptocurrency mining, you're just mining to try every single possible answer, and you're rolling through these extraordinarily fast, like millions of guesses a second. It's insanely quick, and a way that people actually measure how quickly the amount of time it takes to break a password is not even time, it's money. Because this isn't like 10 years ago to where if you wanted to use a bunch of GPUs, expensive GPUs to crack a password, you had to go out and you had to configure the servers, you had to install them, you had to do all this legwork. You can rent NVIDIA A100 GPUs from AWS or Google fairly quickly, and you can string them all together to break passwords like this. So that's where these crazy numbers like this come into play. And another really important thing when it comes to making your password is, well, something to be aware of is something called mangling rules. So if I have a password like this, let's say it's cats are the best. So this is pretty vulnerable to something called a dictionary attack, which is where an attacker using a program like Hashcat, and Hashcat is the program that you'll use with a beefy GPU to try and actually crack a hash, is that it'll take common words like we have cat, we have cats, we have are, we have the, we have best, and instead of trying just completely random character sets like A, B, S, T, V, completely random assortments of numbers, symbols, and letters, it'll try dictionaries first, because there was a few years ago, there was a website called RockU, and this was a way a lot of security professionals first understood how a lot of people choose their passwords, because essentially it was, I believe, music radio website, and their entire vault, all their users got leaked. And I'm not sure if they were stored in plain text or a very weak hash, but all the passwords got unearthed. And people started realizing how people choose passwords. And a lot of that just has to do with the site they go on, right? So if it's like Netflix, it might be related to a show. And all of these options are things that attackers can put into a program like Hashcat to try and skip the line. That's what a dictionary attack does, and that's what mangling rules do. So if you augment this and try to make it, instead of at, we use instead of a, we use at instead. So like these are both at symbols, and instead of S, we have a $sign. Instead of a 3, we have an E. This is a mangling rule. Whoop, that's a messed up E. But this is a common mangling rule that a program like Hashcat will try to do to, once again, skip the line, because it's more likely that people would do something like this with numbers, or add a symbol at the end like this. And that's the first thing that Hashcat is going to go for, versus just like a random assortment of letters. So a good
So you're saying
password,
after the exclamation point, it's going to try the at symbol, and after the at symbol, it's going to try the pound key, and after that, it's going to
right?
try the
Because that's a common sequence.
Right.
Like there's different types of mangling rules you can do. You could set it to only replace A's with ats or E's with 3s. But adding just a single symbol, or at the beginning, like exclamation point here, or having maybe an at symbol at the end, or 1, think about a password like password 1. That's usually how people add complexity into their passwords, is they either replace letters with synonymous numbers or symbols, or they add it at the end or at the beginning. So one way to, well, until people catch on to it, but one way to make your passwords a bit stronger would be to have something like dogs are 3, 4, exclamation point, hash 6, 7, the best, because the by the way, entropy is essentially a measure of how random a value is. And when we do something like this and add randomness in the middle, that's not a common thing that people do, is add randomness in the middle. And if you look at the length here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That's 18 characters long. So this is 76 to the 18th, which is going to be over like 1.2 nonillion that we had up here. So that's going to be really strong as far as just pure complexity and possible passwords. And it's also going to be pretty solid against a lot of the mangling rules that hash cracking programs will try to use. And that's really most of the advice I would have on creating a password. I wouldn't do something like best nuts are almonds or something like that, because these are all dictionary. It's a long password, right? But this is very vulnerable to a dictionary attack, and
Right.
a password like that might be shorter and use a bunch of numbers. Well, you still don't want it to be short. So this is kind of the ideal configuration, I would say, for a password. And that's pretty much the entire idea you want to have when you're creating your passwords and using them for your services. And we'll get into MFA later and why that's important. But it is important to set a ridiculously complex password for something like a vault, because like I said previously, if the vault gets leaked, then the lockouts or MFA isn't going to help you. So that would
We've
be
kind of
my
been
bit
glossing
on.
over a part here about vaults, but pick a password manager and use it. I like 1Password. What's the one you use, Eric?
The one I use is Bitwarden, because
There you go.
Bitwarden is open source, and they have a great track record, unlike
Right.
LastPass. Yeah, if you could think of it like a horse race, you don't know if a horse is going to not win the race, right? You're betting on a horse. You still need to make sure you have enough money in the bank to survive that bet, but you can still, do research on all the horses before the race. You might see the last pass horse might be a bit sickly, might need some food, and you knew that that horse was going to fall over. But there's definitely still precautions you want to take in place in case you lose the horse race, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the last pass hack was really tragic, and felt bad for the folks who got hit by that. It's just awful. I've had a lot of late nights with friends, and kind of telling them how to reestablish their security life all over again, and just trust nothing all over. And Bitwarden has been a way a lot of people have. I've tried to talk people into 1Password. I've used it for several years and done pretty well with it. I'm a big fan of never ever changing a password. Set it once, as complicated as you can get away with. Usually for my sake, I go looking for what the JavaScript validation will say. Like, I'll put in a weak password and it'll tell me what it should have been. And then I'll work in whatever the strongest that they'll let me have. And then that'll become the password that I'll use. And then afterwards, I'll monitor the website on my favorite place, haveibeenpwned.com, and see if they show up on the list. And they will, if they're pretty good about disclosing if somebody's, been compromised and you need to go to that place and change your password. What's your thoughts on it, Eric?
I would actually recommend swapping passwords around. And the main reason for that is if there's a situation where you or your organization has had some type of credential stolen or leaked, and an attacker could be using those and performing malicious acts against your network or infrastructure. And if you're swapping passwords around, you somewhat limit the risk, as in at one point that attacker could be just cut out completely because you changed your password. And another thing is that it limits the access from certain things you might not think about. Maybe you were at school or something like that, and someone had just installed a password logger on the computer, and you typed in your password and your password just got logged. You had no idea. If you swap your password, say every month or two, then that threat is somewhat mitigated. They might have access for a month or two, but most people don't swap their passwords, and an attacker might be waiting as far as actually trying to make a more serious move and breach things, because they're thinking, well, he's not going to change his password. So it definitely protects you from a few things that might happen in regards to just an attacker stealing credentials without your knowledge.
Okay. Well, there's definitely two schools of thought. I don't use shared computers. That's just not something in my life I do anymore. The only time I really ever had to in the past was getting a boarding pass, and thankfully that's become digital these days, and you don't need to go print those out except for like foreign countries anymore.
Yeah, we have phones, thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully,
a lot of that.
You can scan a lot of that, and it kind of becomes a little bit more personal to these, little handheld servers we keep around in our pockets every day.
I would definitely add that as far as swapping passwords go, I wouldn't really do it for something like a Netflix account, or maybe just like a forum.
Of course, the risk,
like SoundCloud. Yeah, I would just do it for something like your password manager, or maybe like your work email or something like that, because you have return on effort when it comes to security, and it's better to focus on stuff that matters instead of having to like maybe swap every single password every single month. That would definitely get a bit tiresome, even if you could automate it.
Even if you could automate it, the likelihood of getting locked out. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move to our next topic here. How do I protect yourself from ransomware?
I would start off that. So all the normal precautions you'd have when thinking about security. So if we're talking about a server, that would be principle of least privilege. So you want to limit root exposure as much as possible, and you definitely don't want to lend that account out for any reason. And you want all the accounts on the server to have access to as few files and folders as possible. And then something like Immunify 360, which is something we covered on our last webinar, would be very helpful as well. mainly because it scans downloaded files before they even get onto the server. And if there's something malicious, it'll just block it in its place, and it won't even be an issue that you'll have to scan through your folders and get. It'll get stopped before it even hops onto the server. And then we have the other thing of just
Y'all have
minimizing
a
our attack surface.
yeah, I mean, like running a backup, I think is just fundamental. Having a backup that works. Hivelocity has the rapid restore option that could get
Oh
your
yeah,
system back
rapid
up and running
restore is
too.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Rapid
I mean,
restore. I've had many a client come into support queue, and they're like, "Well, it looks like we let them know that their server has been hacked, right? Their server might have malware, and they're if they're a client that's familiar with rapid restore, they'll just say like, "Oh, okay, it's been hacked. All right, just rapid restore, bare metal restore real quick," and it turns what could be a complete catastrophe into just a minor inconvenience for them.
that's awesome. I cannot preach enough. Take the time, make your backups, keep them in a safe place, test them every now and again. Would recommend 10 out of 10. I've preached that one enough though. Let's move on to our next topic here. Multi-factor authentication, which used to be two-factor authentication, but we have more than two these days. Is it worth the hassle?
Absolutely. So real quick, like a little 30-second explanation. Multi-factor is just something you have. So this could be like a physical security key like this, or it's something you know, so like a password, or it's something you are, so like a fingerprint. And first off, one of the huge benefits of MFA is it's nowhere easy to steal. Your password could get leaked, it could get stolen from your computer, you could accidentally send it or paste it somewhere you didn't mean to, compared to actually getting your hands on a physical device like an authenticator app on your phone. It's extremely difficult to get a hold of. And actually, there is a report that has a lot of really good information on this called the DBIR, the Data Breach Investigations Report. And they've quoted that over 80% of security breaches happen because of a stolen password. They were using password authentication. They weren't doing anything with multi-factor authentication.
How many different, we went looking just to see how many different multi-factor authentication apps there are. Well, of course, we found Google Authenticator, Authy, YubiKeys. 1Password has one built into it. I like it a lot. We found 215 different multi-factor auth apps, even one for the BlackBerry, if you're still rocking a BlackBerry these days.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, there was a surprising amount of multi-factor authenticator apps out there. I don't know if all of them get used, but I would definitely say that big three. I personally use Authy, and I don't have any problems with it. It's worked great. And then Google Authenticator and Duo is another one that's simple to use.
Duo's really nice. Yeah.
I think you can use Duo with RDP as well. Like if
I've
you
used
instead of
Duo
just
with
having
my
a
wrist,
password,
with my Apple Watch. Literally, like, do you want to get in? Yes or no? And then just tap my watch, and it would let me in.
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But like RDP is something that gets breached a lot. So having two-factor on something like RDP with Duo would be a huge benefit, because it's not like SSH where you have keys. Oh, and by the way, an SSH key, back to kind of topic one for 10 seconds. The reason why SSH keys are so secure is because they're about equivalent to 544 characters. So if you think about it like that, that's 70, and they use lowercase, uppercase, letters, numbers, and symbols. So that's 76 to the 544th power. And if I put that in my calculator will error out. So there's a ridiculous amount of possibilities there. And that's why keys are awesome.
All right. I have locked up my session. If anyone's still hearing me, it's a small miracle.
We can hear you. It looks like your video feed might be frozen though.
Yeah, no, I've completely been locked out here. All right. Okay, well, let's just move on to the next subject. We'll just do it without slides. We were talking about backup, saving your backup key, but what are we backing up here? We talk about backing up your multi-factor authentication will give you these single use keys, usually about 8 to 16 of those one-off keys to use for single use. I highly recommend putting those in a vault of some sort. If you use a password manager, I highly recommend putting those into a vault.
Yeah, so whenever you install a program like Google Authenticator or Authy, it'll probably annoy you quite frequently about your backup phrase. And that's just going to be a kind of like long list of words that will make up a way for you to recover your Authenticator app if you lose your phone. It'll be 5 common words like dog, ham, trash, or something like that. And you would ideally want to write those down and actually put them in a safe or something like that. Because if you have that, that's essentially like having your Authenticator app anywhere. If you're storing that on a device or you're storing it in the cloud, if an attacker got into your password manager and they were able to get that MFA key, then they would have your MFA. So I would definitely recommend just writing that out physically and saving it somewhere you can trust, maybe parents' house. And another thing is that if you lose that and then you lose your phone, you're going to have to call support for who knows how many services and applications. And I think everyone can agree that's not going to be fun at all. You still there, Eric? Looks like his computer might be having some issues, but in the moment, we can go ahead and talk for a little bit about disk encryption. I'm gonna message him real quick and see if he'll be rejoining us soon. Anyways, so without further ado, one thing you might want to look into when setting up your servers and your infrastructure is disk encryption. Do I want it? Do I need it? So one thing that makes this important is that if it's a location that you trust, say, Hivelocity or any data center with like SOC 2 compliance or anything like that, then you probably don't need to care. But maybe if your stuff is in an office where there's a lot of people, or maybe people come and visit, if you have servers there, you might want to consider full disk encryption. And another concern related to this is that if you have a server that's pretty old or you have failed drives, what happens to the failed drives? What happens to the old drives? If you aren't encrypting them, then you have to be sure that your upstream, your hosting provider, has an agreement with a data destruction company. We do this at Hivelocity. All the stuff that gets thrown away, we send it off to a secure disposal company. But not everyone might do that. They might just throw it in the trash. And dumpster diving is more of a common practice than you would think. So if they're able to find your old drives, who knows what could be in there? It could be customer info. It could be just important details about your infrastructure that you would rather not have revealed. So there's 2 different primary types of full disk encryption. And one of them is stacked file system, where my computer and the partition itself is unencrypted. But for a certain folder or list of folders, those use something like eCrypt2, which is, if you look it up, it's essentially a way to install that on eCryptFS, my apologies. If you install that onto a Linux system, you can essentially select a folder, and that folder and all the contents inside will be encrypted. And whenever you need to access it, that folder is decrypted on the fly. And whenever stuff is copied into that folder, it's encrypted on the fly. So you could say encrypt an entire home directory and all your customer data would be safe. Now, the good part about it is that it's pretty easy to do. You would just install something like eCrypt-FS, which is the actual program on Linux you can use to do this. And you just install it, point to the folder, encrypt it, and you're kind of done. It's simple to set up. The downside, though, is that if your disk is found still, then you can essentially, the attacker can still see a lot of information on the system that might reveal more about your organization than you might want. So they'd be able to read through swap, which is essentially memory. So that could contain who knows what. And they'll also be able to know certain things about your infrastructure that you might just not want to be known. For example, if you might be using some old programs Like say if an attacker finds a hard drive, they look through the system files, they figure out, oh, it's related to this domain. This domain is related to this company, and the server has log4j on it. So now they know where to look and how to attack. The other type of encryption is full block device encryption. And this is where you take the whole drive and you encrypt it from top to bottom, and there is no way for anyone to learn anything about your organization if they find a full block device encrypted drive, because it essentially takes the entire drive, all of the bytes, and it divides it into sectors, and then it encrypts each sector at a time. So even if you had a bunch of large files that might show that you might be a video hosting company, an encrypted drive won't show that. It'll all be equal sectors in there that are all just a complete garbled mess for any attacker trying to learn from it. So that's a really powerful thing to have as far as enhancing your security. But the downside is that you have some operational overhead you might have to deal with. So this is going to include needing to input a password when the server boots, and needing to manage and take care of all of these keys that you might have, because kind of like multi-factor authentication, if you lose your key or your passphrase to the key, because the key is commonly stored on the device, then you won't be able to get to your data. We just want the attackers to not be able to get to it. So you get the ultimate in physical security with full device encryption, but there are risks associated with, you need to manage it properly and know that whenever the server boots up, if you have to reboot a server real quick, it's not going to go anywhere until you type in that passphrase. And next we'll take care of a debate on software versus hardware firewalls, but I'm going to check in with Eric 1 second, and I'm not sure if his computer rebooted. We'll find out in a second. Let's see. And then some fun bits about encryption. We have our standard is RSA, right? But the issue with RSA is a lot of people are hyped up about quantum computing, because there's a certain thing called Shor's algorithm, which is essentially how RSA works. You have a massive number, and the key to that massive number is these two really big prime numbers that are multiplied together. So with classical computers, since it has to calculate all of these possibilities in a linear fashion, as in one after the other, it has to try this, then it has to retry, and it has to try this other value, it takes years and hundreds of years to break RSA. But with a quantum computer, it can essentially roll all these values into a single guess. And if you have something like 1,000,000 qubits in a quantum computer, we're only at 100 qubits right now, so it isn't that much of a fear at the moment. You could essentially theoretically crack that password instantly with RSA. So one thing that we're starting to get into is organizations are developing post-quantum encryption standards that essentially not only are going to be able to withstand any classical computing type of decrypting attack, like a hashcat or something like that, but also be able to withstand it's essentially future proofing. So any quantum attack will also be mitigated. So it looks like his PC is still having issues. So let's see. So pulling back to MFA real quick, a really good tip about MFA is that it's a huge peace of mind, because unlike having to worry about, was my password long enough? Does someone have my password? You can somewhat rest easy knowing that if they don't have my phone, they really can't get in. And like multi-factor authentication is, if you have anything important, if it's a bank account, there's really no excuse not to have it at this point, because installing Authy or installing Google Authenticator, you can get it set up in a few minutes, and any other service that you might want to add to multi-factor authentication would only take under a minute. You essentially have a QR code that you'd scan with your MFA app, you'd input the temporary one-time password, and they're both linked, and you're done. And pretty much everything has two-factor authentication, even things you might not initially think of. So cPanel has it, Proxmox has it, and then any other app you might want to have, like Slack, Atlassian, Gmail. It's very commonplace. Most major software services do not have MFA at this point. It's becoming pretty standard in the year 2023. Oh, and 2022 for that matter. So yeah, it looks like Eric is still debugging his computer a little bit. It definitely happens. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on to another topic while we're waiting. Another thing is that one huge reason that a lot of stuff gets leaked is actually just plain misconfiguration. And this is becoming a lot more common with the advent of things like APIs and object storage. Fun story regarding this is I have a personal knowledge base I use, and oh, hey there.
Hi there. Speaking of multi-factor authentication, I was fighting that to get back in here.
Yeah, that's the operational overhead we were talking about.
Oh, sorry about that. All right, how far did you get, Eric?
So I went over, I went on some tidbit about object storage just now, but I'm going to tilde that real quick. The default when I installed this personal knowledge base application, I set it up with Docker, but the default was public access for all your images and documents. So definitely look at those policies in something like AWS or Hivelocity. We have Wasabi storage, which is a lot cheaper than AWS, but definitely check those defaults for API keys and object storage because it could be something atrocious. But while you were gone, I went over some disk encryption stuff, the difference between stack file system encryption and block device, and then a little bit about how post-quantum encryption standards might become a thing in the future.
I know with qubits, it really does kind of all go out the window, and they're surviving for longer and longer. I mean, it's just a matter of time before you'll be able to lease time on.
Oh, you already are.
Oh, wow.
IBM offers it. It's experimental. It's not a bunch of qubits. There's not too many practical applications, but I forgot what their product was called, but yes, you can use, I believe something like IBM Quantum, but yeah, you can go and rent quantum compute resources, a tiny bit of it, but you can do it already. So you're 100% right. That's going to be far more relevant in the future.
Yeah, I recently read about a nonce attack where they were using basically detecting reused nonces and trying to factor out, they had found a way of predicting that they had been reused. And sure enough, when they went and factored out all the wallets that would have this type of attack, they'd already been drained because the nonce had been reused. Sorry about that. We had some exciting technical difficulties on my side. And
oh, yeah, it happens. To be honest, I thought it would be me. I thought my Linux laptop would betray me.
Well, we were talking like, man, that load average is a little high. I wonder what that's about. And then sure enough, it has to go on. Next up, we had to talk about network security. We were going to talk about firewalls, I believe.
Oh, yeah. So I kind of think it's best to go after a hardware firewall, especially if you have multiple devices, because there's a few things that you want in a firewall that a hardware firewall does best. And a lot of that is a completely different operating system that has a very minimal amount of things going on within it. And an operating system that's built from the ground up with security in mind. Linux is definitely built with security, but it has so many things inside of it that are either third party or users are mucking around in it, installing their own programs. And with a hardware firewall, you just don't have that same level of concern. It's just the hardware doing its thing and there's no noise. You don't have to worry about Log4j or anything like that. And you also get very good vendor support with a lot of firewalls. I know FortiGate is spectacular, Juniper, and then you have Cisco. And if I have a whole rack full of devices, right, it's not difficult to use one firewall to manage all of them through the switch versus having to set up IP tables on every single server and manage 40 instances of a software firewall versus one hardware firewall.
I get a shortcut for you on that one. Immunify 360 offers a really nice shortcut for managing a local IP tables firewall, and it's already tuned to protect yourself against those sorts of threats. So you don't have to do any sort of configuration or anything that would go with that regard. It's out of the box, ready to keep your website safe from would-be attackers and the malware that they might deliver to your network.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and then another thing, I mean, I think Immunify is pretty resource efficient, but another thing about a hardware firewall is that you just won't have to worry about it pulling compute or RAM away from your servers.
You're right, and especially if there's those DDoS attacks. I mean, eventually the saturation and gear can definitely help you out there. I mean, when people go to find the theoretical maximums, at that point you really are just down to processing power and as fast as you can ban them.
Oh yeah, most of it is just pure bandwidth. Like most DDoS prevention for large hosting providers that have the best DDoS prevention, it's just being able to withstand ridiculous amounts of bandwidth at pretty much at the ingress point at the edge of wherever your data center hooks up to your ISP.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we're getting to the machine learning part here. We're talking about new and exciting things with machine learning. Which the system I was going to take you at is kind of a burning pile right now, so I'll have to take a look at that later on. But it's a new and exciting field. ChatGPT, of course, writing and making a lot of those efforts a lot easier. I highly recommend taking a look at that personally. And what was the other one? GitHub Copilot. That's been very, very eye-opening for me as well. Making some good comments and ideas, and then Copilot just trying its best to guess at what it wants to do. Syntax be damned sometimes.
Yeah, I've definitely those types of tools, ChatGPT particularly. I haven't messed with Copilot much, mainly because I just code in Vim, but
you can make it in Vim.
Has been
GVim.
Oh, really?
I made it
terminal?
work. Yeah. I made GVim. That was the first one I used, and it wasn't enough for me. Like it totally works that way. Yeah, NeoVim. Yeah, that's another great one. And then I worked through. I tried every one they had. I even got Visual Studio working, which is probably why that computer died earlier. It's probably not.
Oh yeah, I guess you could also do VS Code and then use Vim key bindings in that. And I know VS Code is going to have Copilot support. So yeah, that's a good idea. I should definitely start playing around with it. Also as a learning tool, besides just writing code for me. But yeah, another thing to think about regarding machine learning and artificial intelligence is that kind of like how having access to large compute resources changed a few things when it came to cracking passwords. AI could make some major changes in the security realm. So one thing right off the bat that I thought of is if you were able to have a large enough model look at machine code for certain programs, for example, maybe Microsoft Windows, and start making sense of it more than a human could, not fully decompiling, but maybe figuring out how a lot of programs work under the hood without getting the source code, you could see a large amount of zero-day vulnerabilities come out if some attacker is able to use that effectively. And a huge note regarding AI is that I know there was that big paper signed about let's stop AI. That it's not really possible because the ball has been thrown, so to speak. And right now, OpenAI has the best model and all of that, but I believe Stanford Research already released a local model called Alpaca, which is not as powerful, but far more efficient, as in able to do some of what ChatGPT can do, but with far less resources. So these types of tools that release and come out in these open source models are 100% going to fall into hackers' hands, and they're going to figure out all types of ways to use those to their advantage and probably to your disadvantage. And another thing
we see that already with malware. People there's a Dan mode for a lot of those tools that will let it do anything. Pretend that we're going. And so Dan will just, jiggle the malware a little bit, and it's polymorphic. It looks totally different than it. The code is different, but it'll behave in similar ways. So you can't just block by the code itself. You have to block the bad behavior, which is another thing that Unify 360 would help you with. Not particularly just to say that, but it really is blocking the bad behavior. You start interacting with that more than you do the actual type of infection that's uploaded.
Well, yeah. And I think another thing that is going to be a huge, like defense wise, is if you're using AI with your infrastructure, like let's say maybe you want to make the job easier on sysadmins or something like that, and have some type of portal where customers can more easily manage, say, a website or a hosting service. You have to make sure that your learning model in place has the certain precautions that it needs, because I've seen reports of certain websites that start employing these really early AI tools have problems, because you could ask the AI, like, hey, could you please drop whatever SQL table exists behind you? And in cases, the AI has actually done it, and the website just crashed right after that. So if you're using AI in your stuff, you have to make sure that, all the precautions are in place so that doesn't happen to you.
Oh my goodness, that would just be awful. All right. Well, we're also going to take questions. So if you have any questions to ask, please feel free to load them up in here or ask in the chat room. We'd love to talk about those as well. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm kind of on my second computer here in the middle of this webinar, and I don't quite have all my notes to be able to move through as fluidly as we planned on. Let's go back.
Real quick, I see one question from Hudson Green. I would definitely just recommend Immunify. That's a really good one. Because Maldet and I believe the other one is Clam AV, they aren't as real time as Immunify is. Like, you can schedule scans, but it's not right when stuff hits the computer. And I'm sure there's other ones that act similar to Immunify, but I'm not sure of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, Immunify's got the fnotify data access, so it's going to new files touch the file system and go straight into the scanner. So that sort of what password manager do you use?
So I use Bitwarden. The great thing about Bitwarden is that it's open source, which is not a common theme among password managers. And another really cool thing about Bitwarden, you can actually self-host it. You can, let me actually look up.
It's a Docker container, right?
I believe so. I want to say yes. Let's see. Okay, well, come on, go over their screen. There it goes. Okay. Believe it is a Docker container, but it's free right off the bat. You don't have to pay anything. And then you can also pay premium to be able to store stuff like images inside of it. But if I go to, so and it also has desktop clients, web browser. It actually has a command line client as well, which is kind of fun.
I use that with my 1Password to lock my SSH keys down. That's really nice that it just jiggles my watch and says, do you want to approve it or not? And I really like that.
If you don't care at all about open source, I would actually just recommend 1Pass. That's pretty fantastic. Let's see. I guess I'll just have to look it up. Bitwarden self-host. I believe it is a Docker container, though.
I've looked at setting it up myself, and I'm probably going to make my kids do it so that they can get a little bit better with managing. They need a reason to manage something that isn't their Minecraft server.
Right. Okay, yeah. Like, you can use Docker, you can use a normal server. There's all kinds of ways to do it, but I definitely think that Bitwarden has not let me down once, and I've never had any like outage issues or anything like that, and I trust them with my passwords. I think
Clinton has
solid.
a good question here. Thoughts about advantages and disadvantages of using SSO where possible. Examples: Google, Microsoft, in conjunction as well with a secured SSO provider. I love it. Using SSO personally for business. I use it every day. It works out great for us. and for me, I feel pretty secure about, getting into things. If whenever it's time to access something, all the roads lead back to that, SSO like it's supposed to.
I couldn't agree more. And another thing is just beyond security, SSO, when you start adding one app, then two app, then three app, then a dozen apps to your organization that users access, the management is just so much better. And it's a lot more ideal to just focus on hardening one identity provider than having to worry about an account on this one, an account over on this machine, and then having to manually manage it all. That becomes a nightmare very quickly. But
Pretty
yeah,
quick
I couldn't agree
after
more.
If I lock myself out with 1Password, I will hop over and use either my Google to log in or something else like that. My Microsoft account or something like that, just whatever they can tie in, because the risk of somebody, stealing my Whataburger login is pretty low. But I still want to be able to get in and collect my points. So I use those sort of single sign-on options for those places where the risk is comparable. Would I use single sign-on for my bank? No. That's the sort of risk decision you need to be cognizant of and make yourself. Those are things that are important. You need to set aside a secure note in whatever password manager you have, and set those steps out so that if somebody's coming along and do that. Let's see here. You touched on on physical MFA keys. What are some examples of this? Well, the physical one, I guess was it the YubiKey, right?
YubiKey is one of them. There's a lot of different keys. So very basic level on how these work is that they spit out like a random chain of words that only this can generate. So, and it's impossible. I mean, theoretically, as of right now, there's no way to like get past that. There's no way to like cheat this. It's, like 1 out of an IPv6 possible amount of addresses chance. So when you have physical keys, it's pretty much if you don't have that key, you can't get past whatever MFA the person or individual organization is using, unless you find some way to essentially hack the MFA method, which is I don't hear of it all often at all. But yeah, there's YubiKey. There's definitely a lot of other ones out there as well.
Yeah, I have a Flipper Zero that has a YubiKey like tool built into it that I use as well. But the one way you really don't want to use is text messages. Okay, that is not good multi-factor. Those can be intercepted. They can be retransmitted. They can be intercepted and retransmitted to you for a long period of time. And so the persistent threat can still have access to your account every time you log in. They could get access.
Well, yeah, and another thing about text messages is that you can actually, if you're a big enough target, say if someone figures out if you're at a bar and you start bragging about how like I have 100 Bitcoins in Coinbase, and so some hacker guy is there and he listens to you, then he might start looking you up and figure out that, okay, well, he uses AT&T or uses T-Mobile, so I'm gonna pay the regional manager over at AT&T like $1,000 so he can transfer the SIM to my phone. I'll get the text and I'll get rich quick, man. So
I think I heard about that in Sri Lanka. Yeah.
I would not, like you're saying, I would not trust text message. It's nowhere near as secure as an authenticator app like Authy or a physical key.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? We're almost to the end of our time box, and I'm gonna go back and watch the recording to see what I missed on this this webinar. Thanks so much, Eric, for catching the slack here.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, Hudson, you bring up a very valid point. Social engineering is always going to be a way to get access. Talking people into giving you access is the number one way of getting access to something is building trust, and then getting your way, bluffing your way into a situation you shouldn't be. So that will always work on some sort of level. But security is kind of a personal choice. You need to take a mindset where you're responsible and you try to make the best effort and minimize the risks that you're taking, and that and what you're putting effort into protecting, and how valuable it is.
that gets me thinking, there is something called the Data Breach Investigations Report, or DBIR. And that's some of the
Yeah.
ways I prepped a bit for this webinar. And there's a bunch of really good information about that. And when Hudson mentions the human element, and over 80% of major breaches, there's some type of human mistake that occurred in the process, because that's the usual way that organizations get breached, is usually through something like social engineering at some part of the process. Maybe that's how the hackers
Right.
got in. Maybe that's how they got elevated permissions. And I'm going to go ahead and post a link to that data breach investigations report. I've actually got it printed out right here. But,
He was very
but
proud of it. It's awesome.
Oh yeah, very proud of my printer. And
that too.
and there's a lot of really good information in there. And if you want to kind of understand, how am I at risk the most? How do people usually get attacked? And the new tricks that attackers are beginning to pick up as the years go on, that is a wonderful research for obtaining such information.
Okay, well, on that bombshell, I think we're going to wrap up. We're at the end of our time box. We'd like to thank you all for attending this event. Please share your feedback, and we'll do another one if I can ever get the my desktop to reboot. And thank you all. Y'all have a great weekend. And Eric, thank you for being on another one of these calls with us.
Oh yeah, I love it. Same to you.
Well, see you guys in a few months when we do another one. Bye, everyone.
Have a good one, y'all.